A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Welcome back to 2020. This is Andrew McLennan, your host today. We're going to have some discussion now about the apparent lapse in responsibility that the Secret Service is being accused of following the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. We're going to speak with an Australian security expert and get his thoughts on what went wrong. Gav Schneider is a leader in the field of human-based risk management and the psychology of risk. He's the CEO of the Risk 2 Solution Group. He's consulted to Australian government agencies, security experts, overseas militaries, paramilitaries. He's been involved in training the Israeli military and various security agencies here in Australia. And Gav joins us now. Gav, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me. Great to be back.
Yeah, good to have you again, Gav. So obviously big news, this attempted assassination of Donald Trump. A lot of people are asking the question, how does a kid with an AR-15 get within 150 metres of Trump on a roof and have a shot at him?
So I think the first piece that we've got to remember is that in hindsight, everything is easy. And in terms of protection, it's incredibly difficult to protect anybody from threats when there are so many and such a diverse layer of threats. And I think the challenge we also have is, even though it's the Secret Service with much law enforcement support, they don't have unlimited resources. So, yes, potentially from a planning perspective, there might have been an initial lapse in not necessarily noting the high ground. The fact that the response was so effective means that the planning was actually quite good. But it's probably too early to speculate exactly what the root cause was.
Okay. When you first heard the news, I'm assuming, based on what you do for a living, you were very interested in this and you really dug in and found out as much as you could?
Absolutely.
So what were your initial findings? Like, what was your assessment initially?
So I think the initial challenge with any sort of attack is how quickly these things happen. If you review the footage, you can actually see an incredibly effective response from the protection team, as well as the additional law enforcement support that was around there. And, arguably that saved President Trump's life.
Yeah.
Noting how quickly he was taken to the ground, how quickly a human shield formed around him, how effectively they provided cover for him as they moved him off. It's easy to throw blame, but in many cases, this was almost a best practice response to a very, very difficult attack to prevent. And, I would ask any of your listeners, just simply walk outside next time you're in any open area and look how much high ground there is and how many places it's possible for people to get an advantage. And it starts to give you the enormity of the challenge of trying to protect somebody who's under constant threat.
Okay, so your initial assessment is Secret Service did a fairly good job. They obviously reacted really well. Their reaction was excellent and, as you said, probably saved more than just Trump's life. Several others could have died in the crossfire, and sadly I think one 50-year-old male did die in the crossfire. But so you're giving the Secret Service a pretty good mark.
Well, I think you've got to assess it in different aspects. But there's the planning component, there's the ability for the different layers. And this is the important part to remember, that when what we see on TV is only a very, very small part of what's happening to protect somebody. And there are many, many layers and moving pieces behind the scenes that all have to be perfect to make sure nothing happens. And bearing in mind, there are probably thousands of threats coming in every week for somebody running for president in the USA. The fact that the vast majority of these are prevented actually shows how effective the protection structure is. But as the old saying goes, they only have to get it right once. The protection team has to get it right all the time.
Yeah, well, it's not my idea of a good job, because those guys, they really dive on top, don't they? And they're willing to take bullets. And I know when Reagan, former President Reagan, someone tried to assassinate him in the 80s, one of his Secret Service agents took a bullet and I think was a paraplegic the rest of his life from memory.
Absolutely, and I think that's the fundamental decision that somebody who goes into close protection at that level has to make. And, practically, while it's never a good strategy to be willing to give your life to protect somebody, that is the ultimate sacrifice that a professional protector should be willing to make. And you saw the Secret Service do that perfectly almost. The other challenge, I think, is probably a bigger macro challenge, and that it's never really a healthy representation of what's happening societally when you see people being willing to resort to lethal force because of political challenge. So, we're seeing an increase in violence pretty much all over the world post-COVID. It's a bit of a worrying trend, and it's something that, is probably bigger than just looking at the attempted assassination.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's our previous guest actually talked about this, that it really reflects modern politics too, that it's become very personal. So instead of, the media outlets and the political opposition of Trump, who obviously just don't want him to be the president, instead of them attacking his policies and his ideas and his vision for the future and his leadership, they've attacked his person repeatedly. And it only takes one deranged young man, which I'm assuming that's what this young man was. He wasn't well, to think, I need to take matters into my own hands. I need to kill this guy because this guy's a threat to world peace. He's a threat to America's future. And it's just very sad. It's a very sad reflection on modern society, I think.
And to your point, it's made more complicated. Obviously, we can look at gun laws and you can look at the way all of that happens. But ultimately, the saying from a protection perspective is if somebody's willing to trade their lives for a kill, it's exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to actually stop that. So the fact that, the result is what it was is actually almost a win, bearing in mind how hard it is to stop a committed attacker who's willing to sacrifice their own life.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that photo of Trump with his fist raised and the blood streaming down his face, that photo will live on for at least 100 years. That will be one of those iconic photographs of American history because it's a very, very powerful moment, isn't it? It sums up so much of the culture wars that are going on right now and the fight and the struggle in the political realm. And I think it just sums him up as a person too. He's like the Energizer Bunny. He won't stop. He's just unstoppable.
Well, to your point, love him or hate him, you have to respect the sheer tenacity after being shot at, thrown to the ground, not knowing how wounded you are, standing straight back up and, showing bravery is quite commendable, whether you like it or not.
Oh, he's a fighter. Yeah, regardless of his politics, he's a fighter. There's no doubt about it. And I know there is, from my observation, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. There seems to be a high proportion of military and those involved in policing in America who actually do support Trump. That's my observation anyway. He seems to have a real affinity with law enforcement and military.
Well, I guess I'm not a political commentator. I'm a security and risk expert. But to your point, we really do, when situations like we see unfolded with this assassination attempt, you really do see the celebration of our sheepdogs, our protectors, our law enforcement personnel standing up and being celebrated. And, it's very easy to throw stones and, look at the excessive use of force cases or the occasional unlawful behavior of a law enforcement officer. But we should also be celebrating the heroism of multiple people who respond under threat.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
There's lots of ways to look at these things.
So I'm going to ask you one final question, Gav. Let's just pretend that Trump flew you to the White House tomorrow and said, Gav Schneider, what is your advice for me now between now and the next election? What would you be advising him?
So the biggest challenge, almost guaranteed now, is that because an actual attack has happened, the entire threat profile has changed. And you'd be seeing a significant uplift in the security overlays. The challenge usually in protecting somebody from a political perspective who has to campaign is that they have to be out in public. So you can't lock them away and you can't shelter them. You have to plan far more meticulously, and you'd have to make sure that you had additional resourcing available, because almost guaranteed, once one attack has happened, it does create a layer of copycatting. And this is not just for Trump's side of the house. It creates a structure across anybody in that political domain being under higher level threat than they might normally have been. Equally, you've got to realize that you can't control every variable. And if you actually look at the way Trump responded when the attack happened, he worked very well with his protection team. So one of the things I'd be encouraging would be to make sure that there's ongoing rehearsals, preparations, and while the focus should be on prevention, the ability to respond if an attack happens has to be something that's seamless and easy to do, which takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, and maybe a lot of burpees for Trump as well. Hey, get down, get up, get down, get up. So, well, Gav, really good to get your thoughts on this. Very balanced and obviously from a wealth of experience and knowledge there. I want to just put it out there that Gav has written a book called Can I See Your Hands? It's a guide to situational awareness, personal risk management, resilience and security. And if you want to get your hands on this book, he has a website. It's risk2solution.com. That's risk, then the number 2solution.com. Or you've got the r2s.academy. That's R, then the number 2s.academy. His name is Dr. Gav Schneider. Even if you Google him, you'll find him on there. It's a great read, that book. But Gav, as always, really good to get your thoughts and perspective on this very important unfolding event in US politics right now.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for having me. And I would say this is probably one of those monumental events that, certainly this election campaign will be marked by. But, when you're living through history, it's important to remember that we don't have all the details at the time. So it's important not to reach too snap decisions and wait for the investigation and for the reality to unfold.
Yeah, for all the facts to be uncovered. Very well said, Gav. You have a good day and we'll talk again.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to everyone listening in.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.